Hello everyone, welcome to the first real video of my channel. So as you can see by the title, today we're going to be discussing Deltarune from the perspective of an EarthBound fan. I am first and foremost an EarthBound fan. I have really only gotten into Deltarune after chapters 3 and 4 released. I was always into Undertale a lot more, but especially EarthBound. EarthBound has been a bit of a constant for me ever since I was a kid playing, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and that annoying kid just kept beating me every single time. So I eventually did get into EarthBound as a result. Though, I'm arguably a bit more knowledgeable of EarthBound than I am Deltarune, just because after the new release of the Chapter 5, I have some catching up on the lore to do. And that's a bit hard when, you're only 2 days after Chapter 5 has released. Yeah, I guess I'm slacking here, but I am very keen on noticing these little patterns because Toby Fox was also an EarthBound fan from the very beginning. And while I do really think that these are definitely not going in the same direction, I have my suspicions that Deltarune isn't merely inspired just by Mother 3, as most people are claiming. Deltarune itself takes a lot from Mother 1 and 2, also known as EarthBound Beginnings and EarthBound. So, while I actually just don't know how to play Mother 3, and I'd love to have played it, but I've already had the entire ending and plot spoiled to me, because I was a very, curious little bugger when I was younger, and wanted to figure out, hey, what happens after Porky escapes at the end of EarthBound? But I do think that there are a lot more parallels I'm just starting to notice now. Specifically, just because of the fact that in Chapter 5 there is this item that you can find and equip. It's called the Red Ribbon. And in EarthBound there is also an item called Red Ribbon that you can equip on the character Paula. Now, we're going to be talking about Paul later. However, there are a lot of similarities that Deltarune and the Mother series have in common. So, the player is a force in EarthBound. We know this for sure, because this is confirmed by the Gygus fights. That unknowable eldritch horror, that's actually, that little guy Geeg from EarthBound Beginnings, but for some reason people have mistaken him for, well, I think every EarthBound fan ever knows this. So I'm not going to say it right now, because I don't want my first video to somehow get canceled. So, the Gygus fight, during it, Paula has finally her ability to pray, it's finally useful. Normally, it just isn't, it'll, occasionally clear up some status effects or restore some health, though no, it actually has a purpose this time. And at the very end of it, Paula's prayer for help from the rest of the world is answered by the player, who, by repeatedly pressing the buttons afterwards, sort of gives their power as, almost like a metaphysical presence to defeat the great evil that is Gygus. While in Deltarune, the player is literally you. Yes, as we can see by the fact that Chris has very high anger for being constantly puppeted by us. Now, let's get into the first parallel I really want to talk about. Ness and Chris. No, I'm not going to be comparing Ness to Sans. What's wrong with you people? So, both are teens. Ness is 13 in EarthBound, though in Mother 2 he's only 12. However, I'm going to be taking the American version here, because that's what, Toby Fox would have played when he was a kid. So Ness is, he lives with his loving mother. We don't actually get a name for her, I don't think, although he does have his little sister that he lives with, though she also doesn't really have a parallel in Undertale or Deltarune I can think of. So, Ness lives with his loving mother, and Chris lives with Toriel, who is a loving but also flawed mother, as we can see by the old jitterbug. However, Ness also lives in the north of his hometown, Wunnet, and he lives right at the cusp of the forest, while Chris lives north of hometown, and they also live right by the forest. So, another very interesting parallel about that is that both of them internalize their, darkest memories and, things that they don't really want to express about themselves. You see this through Ness and Magicant. Magicant, if you just haven't played EarthBound before, don't have knowledge of EarthBound or the Mother series, Magicant, if you have any knowledge of Omori, is sort of like Headspace. Magicant is a magical place in which, all of Ness's deepest, darkest fears and, the parts of himself that he doesn't want to acknowledge live. That's where, Ness's nightmare exists as sort of his, all of his internal demons culminating into one sort of combination of a boss that you have to beat to sort of let Ness unlock all of his power at once, while Chris, they internalize a lot of the trauma of whatever happens to them either before they went to hometown and were adopted by Toriel and Asgore, or they're also internalizing the trauma of the day that Des went missing, if they actually were with Des when the whole, disappearing occurred. So that internalizing is sort of manifested with the Eggman, and the fact that whenever Chris tries to draw the Eggman, they really can't, it's just a bunch of scribbles. And also the most obvious parallel of all time, both are silent protagonists, which basically just means you sort of project your will onto them, and it's not like they have voice lines that tell them, yes, I believe this, or I hate that person, Chris never really says, I hate Birdley, I want Birdley to go away, let's fight Birdley, Noelle use Snowgrave on Birdley. No, we just, hit proceed a few times, boom, Snowgrave, but weird route unlocked. And, in Ness, he's sort of like an empty husk you sort of have to figure out any sort of personality from, just because he's like that one, like, little, I guess, stereotypical 90s American kid. He doesn't really have much to him. I think Ness likes maybe a grand total of 3 things in all of existence. His mom, baseball, and, I guess Paula, if she really is his girlfriend, which, given the dialogue in EarthBound, that actually is pretty positive. Actually, yeah, no, I think it's just outright confirmed that they are boyfriend-girlfriend by the end of that. But, that's basically Ness's entire personality, boy, I sure like baseball with my baseball cap and my baseball bat that he used to fight God with. Oh, right, I also have telekinesis and the power of God and anime on my side, so yippee doodles, let's go fight. Another strong comparison of mine would be Paula and Noelle. Paula is a strong PSI user, while Noelle's a strong magic user, especially in the Snowgrave route. Paula also has the PSI freeze ability, which is very similar to Noelle's Ice Shock. Well, a major difference, though, is that Paula also has access to PSI's, they give her fire and electric abilities. But that really isn't as much of a factor, considering the fact that when it comes to my playthroughs, I always had PSI freeze as my go-to ability with her, just because of how strong it usually was. Much, actually, like Snowgrave when I think about it. However, both also are associated with prayer. Paula, by the fact that she, literally one of her abilities is to pray. In fact, that ability to pray is extremely crucial for the ending of EarthBound, since it's what we use to harness the power of the world itself to fight the evil of Gygas and finally defeat him. While Noelle has access to the healing prayer spell, and also Noelle prays in her actual sprite self. Well, also, Noelle is associated with the hometown religion quite a bit too, due to the fact that she is seemingly a devout follower of it and is also in the choir. Paula is innocent and, a Pollyanna, which should trigger the musical senses of any EarthBound fan in the audience. While Noelle is, I guess in a way, sort of what you can expect an older Paula to have the personality of, especially considering the fact that ever since, the disappearance of December Holiday, her older sister, Noelle has sort of had her more optimistic worldview shaken in a way. She's still very timid and kind, however, you can see a lot more of that anxiety and whatnot that sort of peeks through. And one thing that they do share in common is that they both have a habit of getting kidnapped. A lot. Paula gets kidnapped twice in EarthBound. The first time by the Happy Happy cultists. I wonder where we've heard of a cult before. Huh. I wonder how Onion Sound's doing. Anyways, and then also the second time she gets kidnapped is in the Forside department store where she gets, just immediately taken the second the lights go out. While Noelle is, I guess for the most part, Chapter 2 just sort of getting bounced between the Fun Gang and Queen. Queen, of course, constantly just has to sort of be in pursuit of Noelle and is constantly, taking her from the party while she, has to also hide quite a bit so she isn't sort of put in a cage. I think there might be some symbolism there. I wonder what her mother's like. Anyway, both Paula and Noelle together are magical heavy hitters whose ice powers arguably make them some of the strongest, characters in their respective settings. Both also adhere strongly to the wishes of their respective silent protagonists. While Paula will, literally just do whatever, Ness does because Ness is the player character and the silent protagonist of EarthBound, Noelle will basically be coerced and manipulated by the player through Chris and the weird routes. And this is all due to the fact that Noelle has complete faith and trust in Chris, so, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing sort of scenario there. In fact, I kind of feel like both are a bit too trusting in a certain way because of the fact that Paula also got kidnapped by the Happy Happiest cult because, well, she just blindly trusted them. She was a Pollyanna, If anybody knows what a Pollyanna is, it's somebody who is too hopeful and optimistic, sort of for their own good. They can really only see the good in things and not the bad. And I will get to Snowgrave later because that has an entire whole flurry of implications. Now, I'd like to get on to everyone's favorite gamer, Birdly. Now, the closest comparison to Birdly I can figure out would be sort of like a combination of, Lloyd from EarthBound Beginnings because he was a bullied nerd. However, despite being a nerd, the only person we ever see bullying Birdly is just Susie. Everyone else is just extremely annoyed by him. However, I don't really feel like Lloyd is what gets us the full comparison here. If we're trying to get the full comparison, we'd have to look to Jeff Andonuts of EarthBound, and he is the third party member, and we can quickly establish that both are extremely intelligent, and another shared trait would be both are pretty heavy hitters. Honestly, I've seen before Jeff actually hitting harder than Ness in battles. And while at first that came unexpected to me, now whenever I think of Birdly, he was arguably the strongest lightner in the Dark World during Chapter 2. I mean, he pretty much took either Rouse, Susie, and Chris to take down, or also Chris and a Snowgrave Noelle take. I mean, this guy was... He also had a tactical side to him, too, concerning the fact that he was able to sort of, assemble the duck mech and be one of the main factors in why, the Fun Game could actually beat, Queen at the end of Chapter 2 in a normal route. I mean, Jeff's main trait in EarthBound is the fact that he can rebuild and repair basically anything, and you sort of see that too in Birdly with the fact that he is able to repair that duck mech and he is able to make it sort of stand up to Queen, to the best of his ability, of course. And while neither of them really share the same personality, I do just think that is kind of very interesting parallel. I do think that we are going to see a lot more of Birdly in Chapter 6, especially considering the fact that Susie now wants to bring in Noelle, and if we're going to be bringing in Noelle, we should probably bring in, Birdly, because, as we've seen, Birdly solos. And then there is Susie. Susie is a pretty interesting case because she doesn't necessarily have many 100% one-to-one comparisons I can make. However, she does share a personality with I'd have to say, like, maybe 2 major mother characters. Now I'm going to start off with the first one, Teddy from EarthBound Beginnings. And you see, the thing about Teddy is that he's first introduced as this, strong gang boss. And he actually initially fights the party at EarthBound Beginnings, which is, Ninten, Anna, and Lloyd. And what I do like about that is that there is a very strong parallel right there, because guess what Susie does in Chapter 1? She breaks off from the party and fights Chris and Noelle along with Lancer on her side. And that's literally just the first introduction of Teddy, and that's in the first chapter of Deltarune. So both of their first appearances, Susie and Teddy, are both based off of fighting the party, which they later join. Another strong parallel is in Kumatora from Mother 3, which she is, she's the party mage. And because both are, sure, Susie can use her magic. She isn't necessarily a full-on mage like Noelle is, but she still does have, the entire series of busters. Kumatora is, pretty tough. She starts off as a bit hot-headed, and she doesn't really get along with people very well. She also is kind of often, quick to use violence as a solution to her problems, or just threatening people, a trait also seen in Susie. And later on, it is shown that under her, tough exterior, that she actually does care quite a bit about her friends, which is pretty similar to Susie, unless, I guess, you just don't care about Susie's character arc, which her going from rough and tough bully to pretty nice person is kind of one of the main parts of it. And that's about it for Susie. I've seen that a lot of people are trying to make it so that, Deltarune is this, dark retelling of Mother 3, and that Susie is secretly the dragon bound by 7 needles to sleep until she strikes again and destroys all of the world. But I just don't see it. I do think that she is stronger than she first appears. I don't think she's necessarily going to end the world or anything. Okay, she might cause the roaring, but still, I don't think she's this apocalyptic force, except maybe in Snowgrave, where we're going to be seeing the dragon fighting. I don't know. I mean, Susie is called the dragon, of course, but I think that's more of just because, she's a lizard that can fight. I don't know, man. I mean, I'm willing to the theory that she's just like Barney's daughter secretly. I don't really think that she is necessarily this evil, malevolent, apocalyptic force that's just going to destroy all of hometown in this one massive event, and she's going to, destroy everything just because that's who she is. No, she's had a lot of character development, and I doubt that Toby Fox would go in that direction unless he was really just like, people can't change. Look at this. Look at, this poor girl that, started out with nothing. I mean, she literally lives in the dark world, which I do like, actually. Not necessarily that she's homeless, but the fact that she is, living with her friends. At least she has somewhere safe now that, she has people she cares about to be around. But no, that's about it for Susie, honestly. I don't think she's gonna be some, overpowered enemy at the very end. I feel like they'd go strongly against her character arc unless she has some sort of massive relapse, which is possible in the Snowgrave route, but I don't see that in the normal route. Now, here's my personal belief. I think that since we've already sort of seen the ending of Mother 1 reiterated through, Undertale, saying that, in Mother 1 is just, I guess, emotionally harass Geeg with Maria's song, and in Undertale you just sort of, emotionally harass Asriel until he wakes up from his apathy and just decides, oh right, people are still people, I probably shouldn't, kill all of them and destroy the timeline. I do think that we're going to be seeing more of a Mother 3 scenario here. And with Mother 3, it ends with a masked man. And it honestly It's extremely emotional in the fact that you finally learn that the masked man... Oh yeah, major spoiler warning here from Mother 3, folks. You finally learn that the masked man is sort of... He's Lucas's brother, Klaus. And Klaus has been... he died and then was sort of Darth Vadered into a technological terror by Porky Minch and the Pig Masks to serve as this commander for him. And the final battle is sort of just telling Klaus to, like, let go of the pain and the hate and just rest. And after Klaus pulls that last needle, the world sort of ends. The dragon is unleashed, and all the wrongdoings of Porky are undone, and the world itself is finally, at peace. It's able to finally go back to what it was before Porky, came there from the end of Mother 2 and just, wreaked havoc upon the place trying to get back at Ness. Because, Porky just had a very odd obsession with Ness. I might have to make a video on that one day. And what other characters do we know of that are the sibling of a very plot-relevant character that has magical abilities? Let's think for a second. What about Noelle's conveniently missing sister, December Holiday? Now, for the longest time, I have been a believer in Death Knights, but I'm growing increasingly unshaky with this after Deltarune Chapter 5. Now, we can rule out Rudy and Carol as knight candidates based off of the fact that Rudy fell at the festival and is likely in the hospital surrounded by loved ones like Noelle and Carol. And then Carol also really can't be a candidate because despite being, a very cold and, just very harsh person who doesn't really seem to like anyone. Is that a bit too far? I doubt she'd leave her ill and possibly dying husband in the hospital just to go to the Flower King and, sort of disrupt the Fun Gang and Asgore's plans to steal the fountain. And while I do feel like, she is definitely that kind of type who would do that anyways if she was the knight, I don't feel like she's a politician, folks. If she just left her, ill and injured husband at the hospital to go and disappear to God knows where, I doubt she'd get reelected again. I get it. She's the only one that ever runs for mayor, though still, she'd look like a monster to everyone. She already is a monster. They're like an actual, like William Afton monster. Most people don't just leave their ill spouse at what is possibly their deathbed to, well, I'm just gonna, head out into town now, bye. So that only leaves a few possible candidates for the Roaring Knights. I'd have to say the most likely candidates in order would be December Holiday, Azrael Dreamer, and Papyrus the Skeleton. So I'd have to say that for the case of December, we have, the fact that she's been missing for a while, the fact that it would line up thematically with Mother 3, and that we'd also see, just like some resolution to the fact that, oh yeah, she was missing, and apparently plot relevant because Toby keeps leaving little whispers of her existence and, the files. However, that doesn't really feel fully satisfying to me. Now, there is also another theory which I have been personally feeling more and more inclined to talk about. There is a certain level of, I'd have to go with, arrogance, is that the correct word? And how the knight presents himself. And guess who else is a very strong final boss who has a level to arrogance in how they present themselves? Azrael Dreamer, god of hyperdeath. Now, sure, this theory is not very popular or really common, especially from what I've seen after Chapter 5, considering Asgore's dialogue that he would like to, find the Roaring Knight, defeat it, and then parade its body throughout town, which, unless this is Greek tragedy, I don't really see Toby would do this. According to Blue, this is a comedy, not a tragedy, so get up. And why would Asgore really want to kill his son unless he didn't know that Azrael was secretly the Roaring Knight all along, and that the Roaring Knight wasn't really, Azrael taking Des into, God knows where. Actually, it might have been Azrael trying to find Des by opening up as many dark worlds as possible after, I don't know, maybe Friend took Des and, because the Tale of Hell and whatnot. And now, after, Asgore saw the Roaring Knight and, tried to stop it because, oh, wait, it's a thing made of, this shadowy stuff, so it's probably whatever took Des, right? Asgore would have, charged at the Roaring Knight, also known as Azrael, I guess, then. And because he didn't know it was Azrael was just trying to find Des. Azrael just defended himself as much as he possibly could, and while Asgore was able to, take that chip of, that shadow crystal, he just couldn't, beat Azrael, probably immediately fled afterwards. And then we have Papyrus. The evidence for him being the, Roaring Knight is absolutely zero, unless Papyrus is just in Chapter 6 and refuses to go into the Dark World before he eventually does and says, "Yes, it was me, the great Papyrus, all along. I am the Roaring Knight. All your theories are wrong, and Wingding's Gaster is my homie." I don't see why Toby Fox would write that. It don't make sense. That dog don't hunt. So yeah, it just really brings us down to reasonably destined Azrael, and Azrael also still has that whole mystery man thing going on, or masked man thing going on, because he is, Chris's older brother. They look up to him. I doubt Chris would really, not be in cahoots with him if he was the knight. So I guess it's sort of equal either way. It could either be Des or Azrael who is the Roaring Knight. Guess we're gonna have to wait until chapter 6 or 7. So there are still some minor connections, like the fact that, I guess Noelle's family sort of mirrors Paula's family because, I guess merge both Paula's mother and father together and you get, Carol Holiday, because Paula's father does not at all trust Paula's, romantic interest, Ness, the same way that I guess, Carol doesn't like or trust Susie. Also, Carol probably isn't homophobic, folks. She's just, extremely classist. I'd also have to say that, much like Paula's mother, Mrs. Holiday is not there enough for her daughter. Mainly because, both Paula's mother and Carol are, hardworking, and, typically their work might take away from any sort of, time they can spend with their daughter, because Carol is a, mayor of hometown, and then Paula's mother is the owner of Polestar Preschool. Another character that Carol is very similar to, I'd have to say, would be the mayor of Wonnet, because the mayor of Wonnet basically just manipulates Ness into doing the mayor's bidding to get the key to the shack in the north of Wonnet that Ness actually needs to go forward. And he makes Ness, beat up the local gang, the Orcas of the arcade, and defeat their boss, Frank. And I kind of feel that, in a way, this is also sort of, similar to what Carol is doing with Chris. Chris made a promise to Carol, and now Carol is sort of, extorting that and making them do all these things for her so that Chris can get something that, they desperately need. Maybe Carol knows someone or knows a way to get, the soul removed from Chris, and now Carol is using that in tandem with, like, Chris's guilt and promise that they made whenever that was, and is just extorting Chris into going against their friends and doing what Carol wants them to do. Trying to fulfill that prophecy or whatever Carol's goal is, and all of Deltarune with the whole, bunker keys and that possible association with the night. Actually, this is more reminding me from, like, the one cult from Hot Fuzz, just like, it's for the greater good. For the greater good. I swear that they all, like, knocked off Onion-san just for that exact reason. It was for the greater good. Onion-san knew. Now, for the final comparison that needs to be made here. This is a bit more of a difficult one in my opinion. We're currently dealing with the end of the Snowgrave route for now. And it ends with, spoiler alert, Chris and Noelle drowning in the lake. And the problem is, I'm trying to think of, like, other important bodies of water in the Mother series, and all that I can really think of are, like, well, I mean, in terms of lakes, we only have, Lake Tess, which is more of a joke, and then Lake Brown from Mother 3, which, I mean, no, not really. There's the Sea of Nowhere in Mother 3, which actually, fair, that might have something to do with it all. But what about the Sea of Eden? In EarthBound, the Sea of Eden is a magic hand, and it sort of contains all the corruption and evilness in Nessa's subconscious. And based off of, what Noelle says, she wants to grow wings and glide and fly far away from hometown, across a lake where no one's ever been before. I have my suspicions that, in a way, the lake, after they've been submerged in it, might sort of corrupt Noelle, and when the soul perhaps, like, combines with Noelle, like, the evil of the soul in this route sort of goes to Noelle, and through, the lake, like, it's sort of, like, all twisted and whatnot, and Noelle becomes the angel, this ultimate force of, like, like, sort of a reckoning, and we now control, Noelle, the angel, in Chapter 7. That's why we have to wait until Chapter 7 for that, because, well, Chapter 6 presumably is just, the gang's all here, and, we're going to be recruiting everyone for a big Avengers moment in the Dark World against, the Roaring Knights and the Titans. So, unless there was some sort of, like, Sea of Eden parallel here, I don't really have anything for the lake. So that's about it for most of the parallels I wanted to talk about. If you like the video, like and subscribe. I mean, this is my first video, so I'll probably definitely get better over time. And see you all next time, whenever next time is. Oh, and if you want to use any part of this theory, just, like, I don't know, maybe, like, credit me. I don't know, I'm just starting out here. Have a great day, y'all.